He waited every day at the crossroads, his eyes scanning the horizon, hoping for someone who never returned. Abandoned but not forgotten, Buddy, a loyal dog, became a fixture of the town, a symbol of hope and heartbreak. When Karina rescues him, it seems like a new beginning. But even in a loving home, Buddy's gaze still drifts back to the place where his heart was left behind. What happens when the one he's been waiting for finally returns? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any of our exciting stories. If you love stories of overcoming, loyalty and unbreakable bonds, this is the right place for you. Now, get ready for a story that will touch your heart. In a small, quiet town nestled between green hills and golden vineyards, there was a gas station that had become the center of attention for a heartwarming but puzzling reason. Anyone who passed by was greeted by an adorable brown and white dog that seemed to belong to no one and everyone at the same time. His presence was a daily comfort for the locals, a silent guardian of the station, always wagging his tail, as if welcoming each visitor personally. The dog, affectionately named Buddy by the townsfolk, was a sort of celebrity. Children would run to him with treats, and regular commuters would stop for a quick pat on the head. He appeared to be a healthy, happy animal, with a shiny coat and bright, eager eyes. But there was something deeper in his gaze, something no one could quite explain. Despite the affection he received from everyone, Buddy never left the crossroads near the gas station. Day after day, rain or shine, he remained there, sitting quietly, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if waiting for something. Or someone. He greeted people, but his heart seemed to be elsewhere, lost in a different time. As the months passed, his vibrant appearance began to fade. His once shiny coat became patchy, his energy waned, and the locals noticed that he was beginning to look more frail. Rumors spread that Buddy was suffering from a skin disease, and the once cheerful dog was now a shadow of what he had been. Yet, no matter how weak he became, he remained at his post, waiting. Karina, a kind-hearted woman who lived nearby, couldn't ignore Buddy's condition any longer. Every morning on her way to work, she would see him sitting there, his posture slumped, his health deteriorating. She began to bring him food and water, but it wasn't enough. Buddy's eyes were still filled with a sadness she couldn't bear. One morning, Karina made a decision. As she pulled into the gas station, she saw Buddy struggling to stand, his legs shaking beneath him. His condition had worsened so much that it broke her heart. She could no longer drive by and pretend that someone else would take care of it. This dog needed help, and it had to be now. Karina approached him cautiously, her voice soft and full of compassion. "Hey, Buddy," she whispered, kneeling beside him. Buddy lifted his tired eyes to meet hers. For the first time in months, his tail wagged faintly. With gentle hands, Karina scooped him up, feeling how fragile he had become under his once thick fur. "It's okay," she murmured. "You're coming with me now." She took him home, determined to nurse him back to health. Her small house, usually quiet and simple, was suddenly filled with the sounds of Buddy settling in, his soft footsteps, his sighs as he rested on a warm blanket, and the clinking of bowls as Karina prepared food for him. She bathed him carefully, using a special shampoo to treat his skin, and brushed out his matted fur. Over the next few weeks, Karina watched as Buddy began to improve. His eyes brightened, his appetite returned, and he even regained a bit of the playful spirit that had made him so beloved in the town. Every day, he followed her to the door when she left for work, wagging his tail as if to say, "I'll be here when you get back." Karina started to feel that Buddy was becoming an essential part of her life, filling a void she hadn't even realized was there. But there was one thing that unsettled her. Despite all the love and care she gave, Buddy would sometimes stop in the middle of their walks, turn around, and stare back at the crossroads. His eyes would glaze over with a distant, haunting look. It was as if, even though he was safe and loved, he was still waiting for something, or someone. Karina tried to distract him with toys or treats, but nothing could shake the sense that Buddy's heart was still tied to a past she didn't know about. Every time he looked back toward that intersection, she couldn't help but feel that he was waiting for someone to return. And whoever that person was, they had left him there, alone. The days turned into weeks, and Buddy's health continued to improve under Karina's care. His fur, once matted and patchy, grew softer and fuller. His energy returned little by little, and he began to move around the house with more confidence. Every morning, he would faithfully follow Karina to the front door as she prepared to leave for work, wagging his tail and watching her drive away with a look of trust and loyalty in his eyes. It warmed her heart to see how far he had come. Buddy was no longer the frail dog she had rescued. In many ways, he had transformed into a symbol of hope and resilience. But despite all of Karina's efforts, something still lingered in Buddy's behavior that she couldn't ignore. Every now and then, in the middle of their evening walks, Buddy would stop. His ears would perk up, his body would go rigid, and he would turn his head to look back at the crossroads where Karina had first found him. He would stare at the intersection for long moments, as if expecting something, or someone, to appear. His once joyful eyes would cloud with a distant sadness, and his wagging tail would drop, betraying a deep, unspoken longing. Karina would call his name, tugging gently on the leash, trying to distract him. "Come on, Buddy. Let's go home." He would eventually respond, trotting along beside her, but Karina couldn't shake the feeling that he was still looking for someone from his past. The pattern repeated itself day after day. Even though Buddy was happy, cared for, and loved in his new home, it seemed like part of him was trapped in those memories. Karina started to wonder if Buddy had been waiting for his former owner all along. The idea gnawed at her. Was Buddy holding on to the hope that the person who had left him at the gas station would one day return? Karina had heard stories of dogs who remained loyal to their owners for years, even after being abandoned. She wondered if Buddy was one of those dogs, an animal so faithful that he couldn't let go of his past, no matter how much love he received now. The thought troubled her deeply. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Karina came home feeling exhausted. The heat of the summer was oppressive, and all she wanted was to collapse on the couch and rest. Buddy greeted her at the door, as always, wagging his tail with the same enthusiasm he showed every day. But something about his behavior seemed off. His usual energy was dampened, and he followed her with a quieter, more reserved attitude. Karina fed him and then went into the kitchen to prepare a simple dinner. She let the food cook slowly on the stove while she collapsed onto the couch, just to close her eyes for a moment. But the moment turned into minutes, and soon, she drifted into a deep sleep, worn out from the heat and the stress of the day. Buddy, as he always did, lay down beside the couch, keeping watch over her. But as the minutes ticked by, a faint smell began to fill the air. The smell of something burning. Buddy's nose twitched. His ears perked up as he lifted his head and sniffed the air, alert to the danger before Karina even realized what was happening. The smell of smoke grew stronger, and Buddy stood up, circling the room with increasing urgency. He padded over to Karina, gently nudging her leg with his nose, letting out soft whimpers to wake her. But Karina remained asleep, unaware of the growing fire in the kitchen. Buddy's whimpers turned into barks, sharp and desperate, but Karina still didn't stir. The flames from the stove had spread, and now the fire was licking at the edges of the curtains. The room was slowly filling with smoke. With no other choice, Buddy jumped onto the couch, pushing his small frame against Karina's body. He nudged her arm, barking louder, his paws tapping frantically against her side. Finally, Karina stirred, her eyes fluttering open. At first, she was disoriented, not fully aware of what was happening. "Buddy," she mumbled sleepily. But then the smell of smoke hit her full force. Her eyes widened in panic as she shot up from the couch, the haze of sleep quickly replaced by the harsh reality of the situation. "Oh my God," she gasped, stumbling towards the kitchen. The sight of the fire startled her, freezing her in place for a second, but instinct took over. Her hands trembling, she grabbed a blanket from the couch and threw it over the flames. Buddy barked wildly at her side, pacing back and forth, his body tense with anxiety. Finally, the fire was out. The last traces of smoke dissipated into the air, and Karina sank to her knees, her heart still racing. She turned to Buddy, who was watching her intently, his eyes wide with concern. "Oh, Buddy," she whispered, pulling him close. "You saved me. You saved us both." Buddy, as if understanding the weight of her words, licked her hand gently, his small body trembling against hers. Karina hugged him tightly, tears welling up in her eyes. She had taken him in to save him, but tonight, Buddy had been the one to save her. From that night on, Karina and Buddy's bond grew even stronger. He was no longer just a dog she had rescued, he was her protector, her companion, and her friend. The love they shared deepened, and Karina knew she would do anything to keep him safe and happy. But even as their connection strengthened, Buddy still had those moments of looking back. Those moments when his eyes drifted toward the crossroads, filled with a longing that Karina couldn't understand. She gave him everything she could, but she couldn't fill that void, the one left behind by whoever had abandoned him all those years ago. Despite the strong bond growing between Karina and Buddy, the dog's mysterious attachment to the crossroads continued to haunt her. Every time they passed that spot, Buddy would stop, turn, and stare, his eyes clouding over with a sadness that pierced Karina's heart. It was as if he was still waiting for something, someone, from his past. Karina couldn't bear to see him like this anymore. She loved Buddy as if he were her own, but she knew deep down that part of him was still tied to a life before her. As painful as it was to admit, she began to wonder if Buddy was waiting for his old owner to return. Maybe someone had loved him once, but for whatever reason, they had left him behind. And even though Buddy had found a new home with her, he hadn't fully let go. One evening, Karina sat on her couch, lost in thought. Buddy lay at her feet, his head resting gently on her lap, content but somehow still distant. Karina absent-mindedly stroked his soft fur, her mind spinning with possibilities. Finally, she decided she couldn't ignore it any longer. Buddy needed closure, and maybe, just maybe, she could help him find it. Karina picked up her phone and called her closest friend, Isabel, a compassionate woman who was always willing to help. If anyone could help her figure this out, it was Isabel. "Hey, Isabel, I need to talk to you about something," Karina began, her voice hesitant but determined. "Of course, Karina," Isabel replied, her voice warm on the other end. "What's going on?" Karina took a deep breath and explained everything, Buddy's strange attachment to the crossroads, his lingering sadness, and her growing suspicion that he might still be waiting for his former owner. Isabel listened intently, her heart aching for both Karina and the dog she had come to love. When Karina finished, Isabel was quiet for a moment, processing what she had heard. "You've done so much for Buddy," Isabel said softly. "But it sounds like he's still holding on to something from his past. Maybe finding out who he belonged to would help him move on." "That's what I was thinking," Karina admitted. "But I don't know where to start. I don't even know if his old owner is looking for him, or if they're even still alive." Isabel's mind was already working, her natural sense of problem-solving kicking in. "Let's try something," she said, her voice brightening with an idea. "We'll use social media. We can post about Buddy, share his story, and see if anyone recognizes him. Maybe his old owner will come forward. If not, at least we'll have tried." Karina wasn't sure how she felt about the idea. The thought of someone else claiming Buddy made her heart ache. He had become such an important part of her life, and the possibility of losing him scared her. But at the same time, she knew she had to do what was best for him. "Okay," Karina agreed after a moment of hesitation. "Let's do it. It's worth a try." The next day, Isabel crafted a heartfelt post for social media, sharing Buddy's story in detail. She described how Karina had found him abandoned at the gas station, how he had become a beloved part of the community, and how he still seemed to be waiting for someone from his past. Isabel included a recent photo of Buddy, his bright eyes filled with the same mixture of hope and sadness that had captured Karina's heart. As soon as the post went live, it began to spread like wildfire. People were moved by Buddy's story, sharing it across platforms and adding their own messages of support. Within days, the post had been shared hundreds of times, and the comments section filled with people offering kind words and encouragement. Poor Buddy. I hope he finds his family. I'd be happy to adopt him if no one claims him. What a loyal dog. I can't believe anyone would leave him behind. Karina and Isabel watched the outpouring of support with mixed emotions. Karina was touched by how many people cared, but the idea of someone stepping forward to claim Buddy made her uneasy. She had grown to love him deeply, and the thought of him leaving filled her with dread. Are you okay? Isabel asked one afternoon as they sat together, scrolling through the latest comments. Karina nodded, but her eyes betrayed her true feelings. I don't know what I'll do if someone shows up and takes him away. I love him, Isabel. He's become part of my life. Isabel reached out and squeezed Karina's hand. I know you love him. And you've given him everything he could ever need. But if this is what Buddy needs to find peace, then you're doing the right thing. I know, Karina whispered, her voice barely audible. But it's hard. Weeks passed, and though the post continued to circulate, no one came forward to claim Buddy. Karina allowed herself to relax a little, thinking that maybe no one would ever come. Maybe Buddy's old family had moved on, or worse, they had abandoned him on purpose. The idea that no one was looking for him broke her heart, but it also meant that Buddy was truly hers now. She could finally stop worrying about him leaving. Just as Karina began to feel like life was returning to normal, something unexpected happened. Nearly 2 months after Isabel's post had gone viral, Karina received a message. A woman named Blanca reached out, saying she had seen the post about Buddy and believed he was her lost dog. I know it's been a long time, the message read, but I think Buddy is my dog, Bruno. I lost him years ago, and I thought he was gone forever. Seeing that post brought back all the memories. I would like to meet him, if possible. Karina's stomach turned as she read the message. This was the moment she had been dreading. Someone had finally come forward. And now, she was faced with the possibility of losing Buddy forever. Isabel, it's happening, Karina said, her voice shaky as she called her friend. Blanca messaged me. She thinks Buddy is her dog. Isabel paused, taking in the gravity of the situation. What are you going to do? Karina wiped away a tear that had begun to form. I guess I have to let them meet. If this woman is really his owner, I can't keep him from her. The thought of losing Buddy was unbearable, but deep down, Karina knew this was the right thing to do. If Buddy's old family was truly looking for him, he deserved the chance to reunite with them. The reunion was set for the following weekend, at the same crossroads where Karina had first found Buddy all those months ago. As the day drew closer, Karina's anxiety grew. She couldn't imagine her life without Buddy now. But if this was the closure he needed, she would have to be strong enough to let him go. The morning of the reunion arrived with a heavy sense of unease in Karina's chest. She hadn't slept much the night before, her thoughts consumed by what the day might bring. The possibility of losing Buddy weighed heavily on her heart, and every time she looked at him, sitting by the door, tail wagging as if nothing unusual was about to happen, her chest tightened. She had prepared him for the day, brushing his fur and making sure he looked his best, but it felt like a farewell. Karina held his leash as they walked toward the crossroads. The sun was just starting to rise, casting soft golden light over the town, but the peaceful morning air did nothing to calm her nerves. Buddy, as always, seemed content just to be by her side. He trotted happily along, unaware of the emotional storm brewing within Karina. The crossroads where Karina had found him looked the same as it had on that fateful day, but now it held the weight of their shared memories. She knelt beside Buddy, running her hand through his soft fur, feeling a lump form in her throat. "You've been through so much, haven't you?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Buddy looked up at her, his eyes full of trust and loyalty, and for a moment, Karina almost wanted to turn around and leave. To forget about this reunion and keep Buddy as her own, safe in the life they had built together. But before she could even consider it, she heard the sound of a car approaching. Karina's heart skipped a beat as a silver sedan pulled up to the side of the road. A woman and a man stepped out, their expressions a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. The woman, Blanca, looked older than Karina had expected. Her eyes, though soft, seemed distant, as if she was struggling with her own inner conflict. The man, her husband, stood beside her with his arms crossed, wearing a more reserved, almost cold expression. Blanca approached slowly, her eyes locking onto Buddy as if trying to see if he was truly the dog she had lost so many years ago. "Bruno," she called softly, using the name she had given him long ago. At the sound of that name, something changed in Buddy. His ears perked up, his body stiffened, and he turned toward Blanca with a look of recognition. Karina felt her heart drop as she watched Buddy's tail begin to wag furiously, his eyes lighting up with a joy she hadn't seen before. Without hesitation, he pulled away from Karina and bolted toward Blanca, his excitement undeniable. Blanca knelt down, tears forming in her eyes as Buddy, Bruno, jumped into her arms, nuzzling her with a familiarity that Karina couldn't ignore. It was clear that Buddy remembered her. It was a moment that both broke Karina's heart and confirmed her deepest fear. Buddy had been waiting for his original family all along. "Oh, Bruno," Blanca whispered, hugging him tightly. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked up at her husband, who gave a small nod, his face unreadable. Buddy, now Bruno, licked her face, his excitement palpable, as if the years of separation melted away in an instant. Karina stood frozen, watching the reunion unfold, her heart shattering into pieces with every passing second. She knew this was the right thing, but it didn't make the pain any less excruciating. Buddy had found his old family, and now, he might leave her life for good. Blanca stood up, wiping her tears and looking over at Karina. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "I didn't think I'd ever see him again. I can't believe he waited all this time." Karina forced a smile, though it felt hollow. "He's a loyal dog," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "He deserves to be with the people he's been waiting for." The husband finally spoke, stepping forward with a cool, businesslike tone. "We appreciate what you've done for him," he said, though his words lacked the warmth of Blanca's. "We'll take him from here." As the couple turned to lead Buddy, Bruno, back to their car, Karina's chest tightened even more. She watched as Buddy hesitated, looking back at her, his tail still wagging but his eyes conflicted. For a brief moment, Karina felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Buddy would choose to stay with her after all. But the moment passed. Buddy turned back to Blanca, following her to the car with the same loyalty he had shown Karina. The man opened the back door, and Buddy jumped inside without hesitation, settling into the seat as if it were where he belonged. Karina stood there, rooted to the spot, her hands trembling as the reality of the situation hit her. Buddy was gone. The life they had built together, the bond they had formed, it all seemed to fade away as quickly as the car that carried him off. As Blanca and her husband drove away, Karina felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had done the right thing, she knew that. But the right thing felt unbearably cruel in that moment. She had given Buddy a chance to reunite with the people he had been waiting for, but in doing so, she had lost him. The car disappeared around the bend, leaving Karina standing alone at the crossroads, the place where she had first found Buddy, where their journey had begun. Now, that journey seemed to have ended, leaving only emptiness in its wake. For a long time, Karina stood there in silence, the breeze carrying the sound of the distant town. She took a deep breath and wiped her tears, trying to steel herself for the return to her now quiet, empty home. The days that followed Buddy's reunion with his former family were some of the hardest Karina had ever endured. Her house, once filled with warmth and the sound of Buddy's playful steps, now felt silent and cold. The absence of the dog that had brought her so much joy left a void in every corner of her home. Every time she glanced at his empty bed or the bowl in the kitchen, the pain of losing him stabbed deeper. At first, Karina tried to move on, convincing herself that she had done the right thing. She imagined Buddy, now Bruno, happily reunited with the family he had been waiting for all those years. But despite the closure she hoped she'd feel, something didn't sit right with her. An unsettling feeling began to grow in her chest, gnawing at her peace of mind. A few days after the reunion, Karina decided to check in on Buddy. She wanted to know that he was doing well and adjusting to his new life. Gathering her courage, she reached out to Blanca through a polite message, asking if she could visit him one afternoon. The response was quick but curt. "Today's not a good day," Blanca wrote. "Bruno is still settling in. Maybe next week." Karina read the message several times, a strange sense of unease creeping into her mind. It made sense that Buddy, Bruno, would need time to adjust, but something about the tone of Blanca's response seemed off. Karina brushed it off, telling herself not to be paranoid. After all, it had only been a few days. A week passed, and Karina tried again. This time, Blanca's response was even more evasive. "We've been really busy. I'll let you know when it's a better time for you to visit," the message read. No offer of a specific date or time. No details about how Buddy was doing. Just another delay. Karina couldn't shake the growing knot in her stomach. She tried to push it aside, to believe that everything was fine, but her instincts were telling her otherwise. The more Blanca avoided her, the more convinced Karina became that something was wrong. Determined to get answers, Karina decided to do a bit of digging. She began by asking around the neighborhood where Blanca and her husband lived. Discreetly, she approached a few of their neighbors, asking if they had seen Buddy around or noticed anything unusual. Most of the neighbors shrugged, saying they hadn't seen much of the dog. Some even mentioned that they hadn't seen him at all in recent weeks. The more Karina learned, the more her concern grew. Why would Blanca and her husband be keeping Buddy out of sight? Why hadn't anyone seen him in the neighborhood? It wasn't long before Karina's fears were confirmed in the most unexpected way. One afternoon, while she was walking through the town square, a familiar face approached her, an elderly woman who lived near Blanca's house. "You're the one who found that dog, right? The one who was waiting by the gas station?" the woman asked. Karina nodded, surprised by the question. "Yes, that's Buddy," she replied. "Or Bruno, as they called him." "Why do you ask?" The woman frowned, lowering her voice. "I saw something the other day that didn't sit right with me. They had him at some kind of event. It looked like they were showing him off, like he was some kind of attraction." Karina's heart sank. "What do you mean, showing him off?" "They were using him at a festival," the woman continued, her voice tinged with disapproval. "He was on a leash, but he looked, well, unhappy. He wasn't the same dog I saw before. I didn't want to get involved, but I thought you should know." The words hit Karina like a punch to the gut. All at once, the pieces began to fall into place. Blanca and her husband hadn't taken Buddy back to give him a loving home, they were exploiting him. They were using his local fame to make money, parading him around as some kind of showpiece. Karina's blood boiled with anger and guilt. How could she have been so naive? She had trusted them, believed they were doing what was best for Buddy. But now, it was clear that they had only seen him as a way to profit off his story. Without wasting another moment, Karina rushed home and opened her laptop, searching the internet for any sign of what the woman had described. It didn't take long to find what she was looking for. There, on social media, were videos and photos of Buddy, still easily recognizable with his unique brown and white coat, tied to a leash at a local festival. He looked distressed, his tail tucked between his legs, his body language clearly uncomfortable as strangers crowded around him, taking pictures and petting him. Karina felt sick to her stomach. This was not the life she had wanted for him. Buddy wasn't just a dog to her, he was family. And now, he was being exploited by the very people who had claimed to love him. She spent the rest of the night staring at her computer screen, scrolling through the comments on the videos, each one making her feel worse. People were talking about Buddy like he was a novelty, not a living, breathing animal with feelings. Tears of frustration and regret streamed down her face. How had she let this happen? Buddy had trusted her, and she had let him go, only for him to end up in the hands of people who saw him as nothing more than a way to make money. Karina's heart ached with the weight of her mistake. She had to get Buddy back. She couldn't let him stay with those people any longer, not when he was clearly suffering. The next morning, Karina knew what she had to do. She wouldn't wait for another evasive message from Blanca. She would go to their house, confront them, and take Buddy back where he belonged. As the rain drizzled down, Karina arrived at Blanca's house, her fists clenched with determination. This wasn't just about righting a wrong, it was about protecting the one she had come to love more than anything. She knocked on the door, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no turning back now. Karina stood outside Blanca's house, the rain lightly falling around her, but she barely noticed the cold. Her heart pounded as she knocked again, harder this time. She could feel the tension building in her chest. She was no longer just worried, she was furious. Furious at Blanca, furious at herself for ever believing them, and most of all, determined to get Buddy back. After a long moment, the door creaked open, and there stood Blanca, her expression immediately sour. "Karina," she said, her voice lacking the warmth from before. "This isn't a good time." Karina didn't care about niceties anymore. "I need to see Buddy. Now." Blanca's face tightened, her eyes shifting nervously. "He's resting. It's not a good time." "Don't lie to me," Karina snapped, her voice rising. "I know what you've been doing with him. I've seen the videos. The festivals. The crowds. You're using him to make money, aren't you? You don't care about him at all." Blanca's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, Karina pushed past her and stormed inside. The house felt cold and impersonal, nothing like a home for a dog like Buddy. Karina's eyes darted around, searching for any sign of him, but the place was eerily silent. "Karina." Blanca's voice sharpened, but Karina didn't stop. She moved further into the house, calling out, "Buddy. Where are you, boy?" Her heart sank as she reached the back of the house, her voice growing louder, more desperate. She couldn't bear the thought that something terrible might have happened to him. But then, from one of the back rooms, she heard it, a soft whimper, barely audible over the pounding of her heart. She rushed toward the sound, pushing open the door to a small, dark room. There, lying on a dirty blanket in the corner, was Buddy. His once shiny coat was matted again, and his eyes, which had once been full of life, looked dull and tired. He was thinner than when she had last seen him, his body showing signs of neglect. But the moment their eyes met, something flickered in his expression, a recognition, a spark of hope. "Buddy," Karina whispered, her voice breaking as she knelt beside him. "I'm so sorry." Buddy slowly lifted his head, his tail wagging weakly as he struggled to stand. Karina gently scooped him into her arms, holding him close as tears streamed down her face. She could feel how much he had suffered in the short time he had been away, and it filled her with a deep, overwhelming guilt. Blanca appeared in the doorway, her face pale with shock. You can't just take him, she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. He's ours. Karina stood up, holding Buddy protectively against her chest. No, she said, her voice steady and full of resolve. You don't deserve him. He's not your dog. You've done nothing but hurt him. Blanca's husband appeared behind her, his face stern. We can call the police, he threatened, but Karina stood her ground. Go ahead, she challenged. You think they'll side with you after what you've done to him? You've been exploiting him. He's malnourished, neglected, and I've got all the proof I need. Her eyes burned with fury as she stepped forward, pushing past them both. If you try to stop me, I will make sure you're charged with animal cruelty. Blanca's husband hesitated, clearly weighing his options. He could see the fire in Karina's eyes, the determination that told him she wouldn't back down. After a tense moment, he muttered something under his breath and stepped aside, allowing her to pass. Without another word, Karina walked out of the house, Buddy safe in her arms. The rain poured harder now, but she didn't care. As soon as they were far enough away, she set Buddy down, kneeling beside him to check his condition. He was weak, but he licked her hand, his tail wagging just a little bit faster now, as if he understood that he was finally safe again. Karina wrapped her arms around him, her tears mixing with the rain. You're never going back there, she whispered. I promise. You're home now. The walk back home was slow, Buddy struggling with each step, but Karina stayed close, gently encouraging him forward. Every step they took away from that awful place felt like a step toward healing, for both of them. Over the next few weeks, Buddy slowly regained his strength. Karina spent every moment she could with him, nursing him back to health just as she had the first time. This time, though, the bond between them was even stronger, forged in the fire of everything they had been through together. The town soon learned what had happened, and the community rallied around Karina and Buddy, offering support and expressing their outrage at how Blanca and her husband had treated the dog. Some neighbors brought food and supplies, while others offered kind words of encouragement. Isabel, who had been by Karina's side throughout the ordeal, helped her navigate the legal process. They made sure Buddy would never be taken from Karina again. Papers were filed, and Buddy was officially hers, safe from anyone who would ever try to exploit him again. As Buddy healed, so did Karina. The pain of almost losing him was replaced by the overwhelming joy of knowing he was finally where he belonged. The look of sadness that had once haunted Buddy's eyes was gone now, replaced by a quiet contentment that warmed Karina's heart every time she saw him. One day, as they sat together in the garden, the sun setting behind the hills, Karina looked down at Buddy, who lay peacefully at her feet. His eyes met hers, full of trust and love, and for the first time since she had found him at the crossroads, she felt a deep sense of peace. You're home now, she whispered, her voice soft and full of emotion. And you'll never have to wait for anyone else again. Buddy wagged his tail, resting his head on her lap, as if he understood every word. The life they had now wasn't just one of survival, it was one of love, safety, and belonging. And no one could ever take that away from them. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like it and share it with your friends. And to make sure you don't miss out on more exciting stories like this, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to receive all notifications. Together, we will continue to experience moments of emotion and overcoming. Until the next story.